Hi everyone, welcome back to our series of Azure Active Directory, and in this video I'm going to talk about hybrid Azure AD joined devices for managed domain. So in the last video I have discussed about Azure AD joined devices, and the agenda of this video will be knowing how you should configure or apply different settings if you want to enable the feature of hybrid Azure AD join for your environment. What are the changes that you have to do on AAD Connect? And then we'll talk about the task which is already created on a Windows 10 machine, and when it gets enabled, how it gets the device registered to Azure Active Directory, and what are the logs that you can refer to in order to troubleshoot if a particular machine is not getting hybrid Azure AD joined. So let's start off by knowing what is a hybrid Azure AD joined machine. In a nutshell, if a machine is joined to your on-prem AD as well as Azure AD, that machine is called as hybrid Azure AD joined. And there will be a device object with reference to this particular machine that will be created in your local AD as well as Azure AD. That means when you domain join a machine, a device object is created in your on-prem AD in the computer's container that you move to different OUs so that you can apply different policies. In the similar way, whenever a machine is getting joined or registered to Azure Active Directory, there is a device object that is created in Azure Active Directory as well. Now, the fundamental behind hybrid Azure AD joined devices for managed domain is that your on-prem object should be synced to Azure Active Directory, and since your object will hold the status of hybrid Azure AD join, you can implement conditional access policies. As I said before, this is the first fundamental behind device-based conditional access. Now, whatever I have said in this particular slide, don't worry, do watch the entire video. You'll come to know everything how it works and what is the relation between device object which is there on-prem, and what is the relation between the device object that exists in Azure Active Directory. Moving on in knowing what is required for a managed domain, the very first thing that you should have is either pass-through or password sync with seamless SSO. This is the very first prerequisite which you have to make sure is implemented in your environment. Second most important thing is that your Active Directory forest functional level or domain functional level must be at least 2008 R2. Now, hybrid Azure AD joined devices are being categorized in two types. The first one is Windows current devices, which is Windows 10, 2016, and 2019, and Windows down level devices, which are the older version of Windows. Now, the difference between these two type of devices is that the Windows current devices gets registered in machine context, whereas the Windows down level devices gets registered in user context. Now, what do I mean by this? That when I will show you the task which is created on a Windows 10 machine, I'll show you an option where it says run this with highest privilege. That actually means that the task on a Windows 10 machine runs with NT service privilege. Now let's talk about more details which are required for a managed domain to implement hybrid Azure AD join feature. The very first thing is that your AAD Connect should be at least 1.1.819 version. This is the first prerequisite from setup perspective which has to be there, and the reason behind this is the console itself will give you the option to configure hybrid Azure AD join. Initially, it was a manual process that has to be done where you were manually creating SCP service connection point in the configuration partition of your AD, and Microsoft was also providing you a script that you can actually initiate and will get the SCP registered for you. But now all that process has been embedded in the console of AAD Connect itself, which I will be showing you in the lab demo. The second thing, which is the most important and which has to be in place without which hybrid Azure AD join will not work, and that is all the machines which are there on-prem must be able to contact these four endpoints so that the hybrid Azure AD join process gets completed. If any of these endpoints is not available, you'll get error 304, and this is the use case which I will be showing in the lab as well. Third and the most important thing is all the computer objects. That means all the OU in your on-prem environment wherein you have placed computer objects should be in sync scope. And whenever we'll enable this feature of hybrid Azure AD join through AAD Connect, as I said before, in a nutshell or under the hood, what it actually does, it creates an SCP which will be used by all the client machines to know which tenant they have to contact to get the device registered. Now let's move on with the lab part, and I'll switch to my machine where I have installed AAD Connect, and there I will be configuring the settings which are required for AAD Connect setup, as well as I'll show you the group policy object that I have created so that all the 4 URLs are available in the trusted site zone of a computer object. Now, if you will read Microsoft articles, it'll for seamless SSO, it'll ask you to get them added in the user context in the local intranet zone. But if you'll read the device, Windows down level device configuration, it'll show you some different information. But what I have done is I have directly added all these 4 URLs in my default domain policy for the computer configuration. But I would recommend you, if you are doing this in your production environment or test environment, do create a new group policy object and don't change the default domain policy. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my machine where I have AAD Connect installed, and I'm going to initiate this configuration wizard. Now the very first thing that we'll do is we'll click on configure, and then we'll select this option of configure device options. Once this option is selected, I'm going to click on next, and as you can see, I'm getting two options now. The first one is hybrid Azure AD join and the other one is device write back. That means from this console itself, you can enable both the feature of device write back as well as hybrid Azure AD join. I'm just going to click on next, and it is asking me to enter my global admin credential, and I've just entered that. As of now, it's just verifying that whether I am a global admin of this particular directory or not. Once it is verified, then it will give us the option to configure hybrid Azure AD join. And as you can see, the very first option is already selected. I'll click on next, and I'll keep both the options selected because I'm going to enable this for Windows 10 as well as down level devices. Now I'm going to click on next. Now, as you can see here, it is clearly mentioned what is the purpose of service connection point. The service connection point is used by your devices to discover your Azure AD tenant information. That's the actual purpose of SCP. Now, my forest is conceptswork.com, but as you can see, it's actually asking me to give my enterprise admin credential. Now, the reason behind this is since this SCP is getting added in the configuration partition, that's why it requires an enterprise admin credential. Now I'm going to click on next, and then again I'll get one more prompt where I will be clicking on configure. Now, this process, which has been embedded in AAD Connect, initially it was a manual process, but the article is still available on docs.microsoft.com, and I will be sharing that article link in the description section. So as of now, we have completed the configuration that is required from AAD Connect perspective. But as I said before, that all those 4 links must be accessible, and for your Windows down level devices, that should be available in the local intranet zone. So I'll quickly show you the location where I have created that change, and now it is available for all the machines. So this is my default domain policy, and I'll click on edit, and I'll go to policies for computer configuration, and then I'll go to admin templates, and from here I'm going to select Windows components, and now I'm going to select Internet Explorer, then Internet control panel setting, security page, and as you can see, there is an option of site to zone assignment. Now, the moment I'll click on show, all these four URLs are getting listed with value 1. If you add value 2 here, all these URLs will be available in the trusted site zone instead of local intranet zone. There is one more thing quickly which I would like to show you is how you can go ahead and check the SCP. For that, just connect to your configuration partition of your AD, go to the service container, and then there will be a container named as device registration configuration. This is the actual SCP which will let the client know which tenant they have to contact to get the device registered. Now we have covered almost everything when it comes to configuring AAD Connect and getting the GPO applied. As I said before, you have to make sure that those four endpoints are accessible. You have to take care of network configuration. I'll show you moreover everything what is done from a client perspective, how client responds to that particular task which is already created, and what is all the process that happens under the hood whenever a device tries to get registered to Azure Active Directory. Now, the next thing that I'm going to talk about will be the client itself. So on a Windows 10 machine, there is a task created already and which is available under Microsoft Windows, and the task is named as Workplace Join. Now, what it actually does, it runs dsregcmd.exe with system context so that the machine can get registered itself. Now, this is something which is by default enabled, but the moment you will domain join a machine, this task will get enabled on that particular machine. So for that, what I'll do is I'll switch to my machine, which is as of now not domain joined. But if I go to task scheduler, and if I go to Microsoft, then Windows, you see there is a task named as Workplace Join, which is showing as disabled. The host name of this machine is core, and as of now, this is not joined to any domain. So while we'll proceed with showcasing you how exactly everything works, firstly, we'll domain join this machine and then let you know what are the other process that happens under the hood. The next thing that you have to make sure is to review the logs which are available in Event Viewer. For that, you have to go to Microsoft Windows User Device Registration. So if I go back to my client machine and I go to Event Viewer, as you can see, I'm getting this option of Microsoft. I'll go to Windows, and now I will navigate to a folder named as User Device Registration. And as you can see, this is that folder. There are certain logs which are already created here because this machine has been restarted multiple times. But we'll clear all this and then I'll show you everything from scratch. Now let's come back to our deck and understand what will exactly happen when you domain join a machine, and when this task will get enabled, what will the process, and how everything is related to one another. So if your machine is not domain joined, as I've shown before, this task is disabled by default. But the moment you domain join your machine, and if your machine has access to these endpoints, what actually happens that apart from getting domain joined, your machine creates a certificate, and that certificate is saved in the user certificate attribute of the computer object. But in cases where these endpoints are not accessible, this certificate will not be created and the user certificate attribute will not be populated for your computer object. Now the question comes, why I'm focusing or why I'm emphasizing so much on this user certificate attribute, because if this user certificate attribute is not populated, your computer object will not be synced to Azure Active Directory. That means you're failing at the prerequisite part itself. Now the question comes, why exactly all this happens? Because if you will navigate to synchronization rule editor on your AAD Connect and check for this rule named as in from AD computer join, you'll find a condition over there that will say that cloud filtered attribute has to be set to true if user certificate value is null. Now, what does this mean? That device objects that don't have user certificate attribute populated will not be synced to Azure Active Directory. As I said before, that this is the first use case which I will be showing you guys. So for that, I'm going to switch to my client machine, which is as of now not connected to internet. And why I'm saying this, because I have disabled the internet connection on this, but the fact is that this machine can contact my domain controller. That means what? If I try to domain join this machine, I will be able to show you that the moment this machine is domain joined, this task gets enabled and you can see different set of logs in event viewer. And the expected behavior here will be that I will get event ID 304 wherein it will say device registration is failed without even restarting the machine. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to domain join this machine. But before I domain join this machine, what I would like to show you is something on my AD. And that is, if I open users and computers, as you can see that there is no computer object getting listed here. Now, the expected behavior is the moment I will join this machine to my local domain, there will be a computer object created here, but that should not have user certificate populated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to join this machine to my domain, and then we'll just check whether the user certificate attribute is populated or not. But let's wait to get a prompt here so that I can show you the moment this machine is domain joined, these tasks will get enabled by default. So as you can see, my machine is now domain joined. I'm going to click on OK, and I'll again click on OK. I'll go back to task scheduler and I'll just refresh this. And as you can see, it's already enabled and it's ready. Now, one more thing that I would like to show you, and that is something which I was referring in the deck as well, that this task will always be initiated in system context, which is run with the highest privileges. Now, if we go back to event viewer and if I try to refresh, as you can see, it is giving me error messages. And let me check if I can show you the event IDs. I'm getting 304. That means the device registration service was not being accessible. As of now, there is a particular endpoint which responds some set of information to your client machine, on behalf of which your client machine generates the certificate and saves that certificate in the user certificate attribute. Now, if I switch to my AD and if I refresh this, what I'll see is in attribute editor, user certificate is not populated. That means if I run a sync cycle right now, this object will get imported, but it will not be synced to Azure Active Directory. And why it will be like this, let me just show you that rule in the console as well. So if I run synchronization rule editor, and if I select device object type, connector should be local AD, attribute should be cloud filtered, and as you can see that this is the rule which is saying the same set of information which I have already shown you guys, that if user certificate attribute is not populated, then that machine should not be synced to Azure Active Directory. This was the condition which I have shown you in the deck. Now, the last thing that I would like to cover here, and that is, now what we'll do is we'll make internet available on that particular client machine, and we'll remove that from domain, and we'll again domain join it, and see whether the user certificate is getting populated or not. So what I'll do is I'll pause this video, I'll remove the machine from domain, I'll make sure that the internet and all those endpoints are available, and then I'll resume the video. Okay, so now my machine has been restarted. I have changed the host name so that there should be no stale entry, as well as internet connection is also available on the same machine. Now the next step is to domain join this machine and then see whether the user certificate attribute is getting populated in my AD or not. If the user certificate attribute will get populated, what we'll do is we'll run a full sync or a sync in short, so that this object can be synced to Azure Active Directory, and then we'll restart this device just to see whether it is getting hybrid Azure AD joined or not. So as of now, the computer name is hybrid AAD, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to my AD, and then I'm going to refresh this, and let's see whether the user certificate attribute is populated or not. As you can see, the user certificate attribute is populated on this particular machine. Now there is one more thing which I would like to show you guys, and that is if I copy this value and if I save this to a notepad as, let's say, I'll just name this file as file.hex, for example. Let's say file.hex, and I'll save this, and I'll go back to my C drive just to see whether that file is saved or not. So as you can see, this is the file which I have just created. Now there is a command, which you can run, and that is certutil-decode hex. So what I'll do is I'll open command prompt with admin privilege, and then I'm going to navigate to this particular location. I'll copy this command and I will select the file which is which is file.hex, and I want this to be converted to certificate.cert, and I'll do enter, and as you can see that there is a file which is created.cert, but I'm sorry, it should be CER. And if I go back now, this is the file which has just been converted, and as you can see, it's a self-signed certificate which is created by the device object itself. It was created by itself and then it has issued to the same device ID itself. Now why I'm saying device ID here, because the moment this particular object will be synced to Azure Active Directory, I will log into portal.azure.com and I will navigate to this particular computer object, and I will show you that the device ID will be same as what is mentioned in this particular certificate. So now without any delay, let's just run a sync cycle so that this object should get synced to Azure Active Directory. But before that, let me just switch to portal as well and see if there is any object getting created with this name or not. And as you can see, there is no option available here which says hybrid. That means this object is still not synced to Azure Active Directory. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to initiate a sync cycle. And there's a reason why I'm doing this from PowerShell, because I don't have to manually go ahead on every connector and then run the respective process. I've just initiated a Delta sync on my AAD Connect server. Now, the moment this sync cycle would get finished, a device object will be synced to Azure Active Directory with hybrid Azure AD join status. But now the question comes that how come this device is communicating with the device object which exists in Azure Active Directory? Now there is a logic behind that, and that I will be showcasing you on portal itself, that for all the machines which are hybrid Azure AD joined, they're actually synced object type, but there is one more attribute that gets populated on that, and that's what we called this particular attribute, which is named as last logon activity or activity, whatever you want to remember or whatever you want to refer to. So now what I'm going to do is I'll go back to my machine and I'll restart that. But before that, let's just verify if that object is synced to Azure Active Directory or not. If that object is already synced, then we won't face any issues, because the moment we'll restart our machine, it will get Hybrid Azure AD joined by default. And as you can see, this object is being synced to Azure Active Directory. Now, if I go back to portal and if I refresh this, a new object is getting listed here as Hybrid Azure AD joined, and the activity time is not populated because our machine, which we have Hybrid Azure AD joined, is yet not restarted. So what I'll do is I'll restart this machine and resume the video. So now, as you can see that my machine is domain joined, I'm getting an option of sign in with other user. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sign in with my on-prem account so that the PRT should be available on my machine. And that is something which we will be checking by the command output of ds-cmd /status. So now I'm signed into my machine and I'll open command prompt just to check whether I have got the PRT or not. And then things will be in place, because that just proves that the machine is hybrid Azure AD joined from client perspective as well. And we'll also quickly check the logs which are generated on behalf of this particular request. As you can see that I'm getting Azure AD PRT, and as you can see, this machine is now hybrid Azure AD joined. Now, let's go back to event viewer on the same machine, and let's see now that whether we are getting any 304 or any errors or not. Because as I said before, that 304 will only come when the discovery fails itself. So what I'm going to show you now is which endpoints are accessed by a particular machine to get it registered in Azure Active Directory. So for that, I'll go back to the same folder of user device registration, and I'll click on admin. And as you can see, this was the last attempt wherein it failed because of network connectivity. But now if I will try to open any other log apart from this, let's see what happens. That as you can see, with the restart, the automatic registration was triggered, and then I'll quickly show you the discovery response which a particular client machine receives. This is something which I've shown you, I think, in Azure AD join video as well. Now the fundamental here is that the endpoints are same, but the way a machine is getting joined to Azure Active Directory is something that is defining the status of that particular machine. Now, there was one more thing which I addressed, and which was showing you guys the device ID should match with the certificate which is saved in user certificate attribute in your on-prem. So I've just refreshed the portal and I'll show you the device ID, which is exactly same to what we are getting in the certificate for our computer object. So the portal is refreshed now, and as you can see, it is now showing me the activity as well, which was initially NA. But if I click on my device, you see this, it starts with 23B and ends up with C355. Now, if I go back to my AD and check that certificate, as you can see that it is 23B355. So this is the entire process that happens when you try to configure Hybrid Azure AD joined, and I have covered this Windows 10. You can configure this for Windows 7, and since this was a lengthy video, I'm sure that you guys will have multiple questions. Please feel free to ask them in the comment section. Now let's talk about a quick summary of what all we have discussed. We have discussed about all the settings that you have to configure for Hybrid Azure AD joined if you are using a managed domain. We have discussed about the task which is created and which gets enabled the moment your machine is domain joined. We have discussed about the generic error which comes when your machine is not able to contact any of these endpoints. And the last thing that I have discussed is the logs itself that you can refer that will give you more insights why a particular machine is not being able to join to Azure Active Directory with Hybrid Azure AD joined state. In the next video, I'm going to talk about Hybrid Azure AD joined machines wherein you have a federated domain. If you guys have learned something new, please feel free to subscribe. If you have any feedback, query, or suggestion, feel free to reach me at learnconceptswork@gmail.com. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time.